Hi, I'm John Sutton. I travel the globe searching for the finest ingredients and the hidden gems that have been overlooked by mass distribution. Food that is shared by generations of families, culture, and tradition. I will connect you to the stories behind well-sourced food, technology, and the people and places who make it happen. Welcome to Truth in Food. Today, I have Stephen Meade.
Thank you.
And Stephen Meade and I have traversed the world on many different occasions, and you're kind of asking yourself, how does an entrepreneur in technology have anything to do with food? Well, a lot. Stephen Meade, how you doing?
Great, John. And I'd ask it in reverse. I've been with you in fields in Sweden for vodka and the back alleys of Hong Kong, traveling through. I technically call you the travel savant, so it's been fun.
It's been good, and we've had our share of laughter and our share of crying. That's a whole nother story when it comes to getting robbed in Milan, but that's another thing.
Moving on. Moving on.
So talk about, your background and what are the exciting things you're doing in technology, and then we'll get into it, how it relates with food.
Sure. I joke that I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. I've technically never had a job, and I couldn't figure that out in college. I was unhireable, and it took me many years later to figure out why. And I don't fit in a box. I think outside the box. I've started 11 companies. Over the span of about 25 years, I've developed something I call the BullsEye belief system, which is really about how do you target things to be specific, focus, and identify and get exactly what you want. And I've really utilized that through the years. I've built 3 companies that were public, tried to launch one in the year 2000 after I took a company public that technically became PayPal, but tried to do something around global currencies in 2000. And I think it was just a little bit early. So the one we're working on now that we'll probably talk about is potentially going to be an 18-year overnight success. These ideas you don't give up on,
Yes.
kind of like bell bottoms. They eventually might come back.
It's so true. Now, the company currently that I've seen you speak on many countries is called Moneta Pro.
Yeah.
Talk about Moneta Pro.
Well, Moneta Pro, I'd like to start actually with the history and the story, which I know you're a big fan of stories, and I research and create names around all of the companies. And Moneta Pro is technically a barter platform, but when you think about it, and this goes all the way back to traversing the history of food, is the way commerce started out for people is we bartered. Right? I've got chicken, you've got milk, let's trade, and we had to negotiate equal value. And the challenge for civilization is if you want chickens and I don't want milk, we don't have portability. So the creation of money and currency really was around to create portability for commerce to allow the civilization to evolve. And the first forms of portable currency ever were the moneta seashell, the cowrie seashells. And a lot of people think the shells in Roman were the first money. It wasn't. So Moneta Pro is a closed loop platform really for corporate barter. It's for big companies to trade food, natural resources, oil, gas, but it's built off of the same premise of how do 2 people exchange value and how do you create a portability to go buy something else.
Interesting. And one of the interesting things for Moneta Pro is we are now living in a world of these buzzwords: blockchain, Bitcoin, electronic currency, cyber currency, all of these things. And people are always wondering, well, John, what does food have to do with Bitcoin? And I thought you were in the food business, but I see you at all these blockchain conferences. Well, it has a lot to do with it. And Stephen explains some of the realities that people need to understand what is happening and how blockchain can help the food chain.
Yeah, and I think what happens too is the world's conflated a lot of issues together. So Bitcoin is built off of blockchain as the underlying technology, kind of like electronic gift card is built off of the underlying framework of the internet. So when people talk about Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain, they're really separate issues. Block is the actual technology. And think about the internet, and this is how I think it relates to food. You can look at any industry in the world, and go, okay, how did the internet impact that particular business? If somebody looked at you and said, are you an internet company? That doesn't make any sense. You're a food company. You might use the internet for a web page. You might use it for email. You might use it for WhatsApp or technology. The internet is the enabling framework under the industries. Mm-hmm. And that's what blockchain really is. So when it gets complicated, my scenario is I tell people, I don't tell you how the blockchain works. I tell you how it works for you. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about some really simple examples around food that I think are fascinating. But technically how it works, I don't know. I mean, we've won 8 contests around the world in the blockchain space. I don't even really know how it works. I don't care. I know how it works for me to solve a business problem, and food's a fascinating one where I think it'll have big implications.
Yeah, and, you know, from my company sourcing foods from all over the world, regions such as Siberia and Russia, pine nuts provided Trader Joe's and Whole Foods with those. Charles Fan restaurant up in San Francisco, the Slanted Door, that was tuna that I sourced all the way from Sri Lanka. And so how blockchain will affect a lot of these things have to do with things such as food security, temperature, logistics, also where it is in the world. I mean, there's so many copycats and so much corruption and so much false advertising and false nature of foods. I mean, one of the simple thing is you go to a grocery store and you're buying Greek yogurt. Well, it's not from Greece. So it just baffles my mind. Or most of the things have these fancy Italian names on it, and you turn it around and it is not made in Italy. It's the farthest thing from Italy. And you need to know this, and that's where these new technologies will help foster the authenticity of where these foods come from.
Yeah, and the example I use for food, because I have to create these simplistic examples, and I'm not in the food business per se, but I know how it works through the food chain. And just like you were talking about, John, if you look at it, and it's not the best example, let's say somebody buys tuna from Costco and the child gets sick. What we know about the United States especially, somebody's getting sued. Yeah. Somebody's going to sue Costco. They're going to sue Unilever. They're going to sue everybody in the, quote, supply chain.
Me.
You. And the reality is blockchain solves part of the problem, but it's not the panacea. So if you have a contract that says that tuna was caught in Sri Lanka through your eco, I love the way you guys catch tuna, by the way, with shocking the fish and stuff. But if that food is followed through the food chain where you know how long it was iced, when it was on the refrigeration truck, those records can't be manipulated supposedly. But the failure is the person who claimed they refrigerated the tuna for the 3 days it was going across the country. And so in my opinion, there's a thing called IoT, which is the Internet of Things. You need to mesh up these technologies. If the refrigeration unit had a device, which it does, they're Internet of Things, that device can register the temperature every 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. So that temperature is now recorded. And that makes the discovery process easier. So when something happens, you'll be able to look through the entire chain and say, oh, this person claimed the truck was refrigerated and they had it turned off for 3 days traveling across the country. Mm-hmm. So this concept about food security and integrity, I don't think people always get it. Yeah, I'd love to know where the tuna came from. People do more to avoid pain than gain pleasure. The pain part is protection of the companies in terms of how do you provide security? How do you protect that food chain integrity so somebody doesn't get sick and die? That's the way I look at it at the extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, people want to know where the olive oil is coming from in a lot of occasions, because there are such different grades of olive oil, but it's so unregulated because there isn't the technology to actually put on the bottles as well as the oil itself and where it comes from. So a lot of cases, you go to a store today, you buy a bottle of olive oil and it's sourced from 6 different countries: Morocco, Spain, Italy, Greece, and it shows up with an Italian name saying this is Italian olive oil. No, it isn't. And so these technologies are going to begin to solve these things for people.
Yeah, and I don't use olive oil a lot, but the one I hear and the one I think makes a lot of sense is in the food security aspect and the food integrity around sushi, where you're buying bluefin tuna and getting charged 3 times higher, and that fish isn't really tuna. And unless you're a aficionado, it's hard to figure out what that is. So
did you just say aficionado?
Yeah, no pun intended, but you caught it. Thank you. Jeez.
It's turned into a comedy show. Okay, here we go.
Occasionally, those usually slip under the radar, under the net. But this idea of how do you create contracts and things that basically aren't changed through the supply chain, and that's where I think blockchain's going to do a lot with not only the integrity side, but also the security, where people, if they get sick, you know where those points of failure are. And I'll give you another real quick example. It's not completely related to food, but it's around a plant. A friend of mine is in the cannabis space. I don't smoke it, never have. I don't have anything against people that do, but they have a medical grade cannabis product that has to be at a 99 point some odd % purity. They kept testing it, and it was coming in under the purity level for what it required for medical. And it took them almost 3 months to figure out where the failure was. And the failure was in the machines. The person was supposed to clean the machines every 3 hours, just like the bathrooms. And the guy was just writing on there he was cleaning the machines. He wasn't actually doing the physical work. And so that impurity breakdown, the contract would have shown that, A, that machine wasn't cleaned if it was tied to other things. And so how do you eliminate a lot of this vagrancy? That's where I think blockchain, again, it's a cool technology. It's not going to solve everything, but it does provide efficiencies just like the internet did in a lot of areas.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I mean, a big issue is raw food, and there's a big raw food movement. Even the juices that you're drinking, it's not raw because the machine that's squeezing the oranges and squeezing out the carrots create more heat, so it's actually slightly cooking that juice. So now people are complaining where these things actually come from, because there are machines that slowly squeeze things using very little heat to preserve the raw nature of the food.
Yeah, and I know with some of the stuff you've done with the Pavo Real, you created a Mexican wine, which I thought was fascinating, and you had to work with the guys on the settings. You know, that wine has to be set at a certain temperature and held. And if it's not, it impacts the integrity of the wine, but there's no way to really track that efficiently. And that's where I think a lot of these things will start coming in and providing value.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in really, really interesting times. And, you know, a lot of people are asking, well, how do you invest in a Bitcoin, or how do you invest in this? And, you know, Stephen has a great understanding of really it's a risk. It's not really investing. Talk about that.
Well, I describe them in 3 different what I call channels, so or segments or columns or boxes, whatever you want. Bitcoin to me was always a glorified gift card. It's a gift card backed by a penny stock. And what I mean by that is I can go buy a $1,000 gift card and give it to you, and it's anonymous, and some people may or may not accept it, and I can even send you an electronic gift card. But if that card was backed by a stock, that $1,000 might go up or down. So this concept of electronic money, electronic currency, your debit card's electronic money, your gift card you buy online, it's all electronic. It's just how we perceive it. Bitcoin's interesting in that it's a single unit. It's like a brick of gold. A gold brick's $500,000, but you can buy a $50 coin. That coin goes up and down as the same percentage as a block of gold. So the fact that Bitcoin's $5,000 or $6,000, to me, I don't care. I think it'll get to 3, 4, 500,000, just like a brick of gold. But you can buy it in fractional units. So the percentage of the world's population who's never had access to traditional stock, a guy can go on and buy $50 worth of a Bitcoin, like he could buy a $50 gold coin. That percentage goes up and down as the same amount as the person who could buy $5 million.
Yes.
So we've never had this flattening of the financial world that to me is fascinating, where Bitcoin sits. Past there, this concept of cryptocurrencies, these things aren't currencies, they're glorified penny stocks.
Yeah.
I can go on a bulletin board and buy a penny stock. I'm not trying to promote mine, Upper Street UPPR is probably 40, 50 cents. It goes up and down. I can go buy Ripple on an exchange, and it goes up and down. I bought it at 30 cents, sold it at $2. This concept of a cryptocurrency has been, again, conflated. They're glorified penny stocks.
Yeah.
They're a stock traded on an exchange, but unlike the bulletin board in the U.S., these cryptocurrencies or tokens or coins are traded on exchanges around the world. So you have a 24-hour cycle with velocity in different countries that in the U.S., you're limited just to a U.S. market. So cryptocurrencies, to me, they're crypto coins, they're tradable tokens, they're glorified penny stocks. And then you have blockchain as the underlying technology, and that's the framework that you'll see a lot of bigger companies going into. But companies aren't blockchain companies today any more than they're internet companies. You're going to use blockchain as a technology within your business, just like people use the internet within their business. So I create this separation that I think tends to help people.
Yeah, and it does help people. I mean, it's so confusing, and people are using all these technical terms, and Stephen Meade is really the one out there in the world, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but putting it into regular person speak. Like if there is the Dummy's Guide to Blockchain and Bitcoin, it would be authored by Stephen Meade. Mm-hmm. And even you've came up with terms that the entire industry uses today. And that's very important because one of the terms, toquity, that was Stephen Meade's invention. The word and the process and everything. Talk about that.
Well, when the world of ICOs came out, which were these new token offerings, it stood for an initial coin offering, like an initial public offering. The people who created it kind of thought it was the same thing like a stock offering. The challenge is these initial tokens didn't have any criteria back to equity. So they had a lot of things that were missing. And as an equity investor, people think they own something. Again, there's these fallacies. If you own a stock in Amazon, you think you own equity. You don't. You buy Amazon stock because you hope it goes up and you can sell it for more than you bought it. If we're honest, we're buying it to make money, not because we actually own anything. But the tokens had no equity ownership at all when they were initially started. And as an investor, I invest in my own companies. The token world made no sense. Now, we won 7 or 8 contests. We raised some money through token sales, but fundamentally, I thought that it was broken. And so what we did is created something called a toquity, which is just token and equity. We're doing another round of ours. It's an equity, straight velocity equity, just like anybody else would do. And then we attached a token rider to it. And it's now called a liquidity token, which means somebody, as an investor, will be able to sell that token on an exchange, but still hold their equity. So what I did is I put 2 concepts together. It's what I call retrospective evolution. Mm-hmm. I looked in the past and said, what's worked in traditional finance? Warrants, options, coverage, equity. How do we use that in the new framework of technology moving forward? And just created this concept of equity with an additional liquidity token. And it protects everybody. It protects the investor. It protects the shareholder. It protects the founders and the investors. So it's a cool concept. We called it toquity, and that token's now the liquidity token. And
what are some of the other buzzwords and concepts you've brought into the industry?
Well, toquity's probably the biggest one. I don't know that I've taken credit for this one because I think you first mumbled it when we were stumbling down the world of Davos late one night. But we also call it a lot of blockchain baffle.
Yeah.
A lot of blockchain babble.
Yeah.
And a lot of blockchain B. We won't finish the rest of that one. But
yes.
But yeah, there's a lot of babble out there of things that I call blockchain babble because people try and confuse you, or they try and prove how smart they are. And I don't need to understand technically how something works. I need to know how it works for me. And so this concept of blockchain babble, people are like, oh, do you have a token? Well, what does that mean? They don't even understand the word. Oh, are you tokenizing? Are you tokenizing your company? And people throw these other words out without any context, and we just tend to call them out on it because most people don't know what they're talking about.
And I think people also need to understand is you're not just coming up with these random concepts and throwing it out there. Explain who the law firm is that you have very, very strict legal documents on for all of this.
Well, we started with, for MonetaPro especially, MonetaPro was this interesting concept around a global marketplace. So it's kind of like Amazon for business. But if you were in Amazon and you sold a computer and you got to store credit, you use that credit inside Amazon. So that's credit's not a blockchain. It's not a token. It can't be stolen. It doesn't fluctuate. It's not crypto. It's just an internal store credit. It's a ledger. Mm-hmm. We had to create a legal structure that said we've created our own ledger credit, which acts as our own currency, but it's not an external token. So we didn't have to qualify under some of the legal things people were jumping through hoops on. So we brought in Squire Patton Boggs, one of the largest.
Yes.
Specifically, again, this is under my BullsEye concept of who are the best firms in the world, which ones make the most sense, and you sort of target down. And we picked SPB because the people involved are 4 former SEC prosecutors. They've got offices directly in Washington, D.C. It was a very political play for us initially. Yeah. And then we brought in Wilson Sonsini, and those guys have been great. They're probably the #1 firm in the world for venture capital. Mm-hmm. And so we brought Wilson in to play the equity game because we're going after equity, and Wilson knows it very well. Mm-hmm. But even in that same capacity, I had to sort of stretch their mind by saying, we're doing an equity round. This token that we've done, this Toquity liquidity, is a completely separate document. The world right now, and I'll try and finish with this, this is where everything gets conflated, and if people want more education, we can figure it out. But 6 months ago, the internet and the ICO world and the technology world worked on something called a security token. It's like, oh, you're raising money, you're doing a security token. And the question would be, are you a security or a utility? Utility meant that token could be used in the system to buy something. Security meant it's going to go up or down in value. You're basically selling it like a stock. Fast forward 6 months, now the security token is tied to equity. So the blockchain world has screwed themselves by calling this new token offering the same thing that they were calling it 6 months ago, but it operates differently. There is no legal jurisdiction around it. Like if you don't want to be regulated as a security, don't call yourself a security token, and don't call yourself something that you were different 6 months ago. So the world is trying to catch up. The legal in the U.S. is struggling with this, but I think long-term, blockchain, again, is fascinating. It's going to solve a lot of problems. The ICO token world is going to provide liquidity for companies and investors and really revolutionize and change the way funding is done for companies, which is structurally different than how blockchain will function as a security tool.
Cool. And again, I'm here with Stephen Meade, the BullsEye Guy, as well as an entrepreneur and founder of Moneta Pro, one of the hot ICOs and companies that are in the space. And one of the things is I have the privilege to work with Stephen on the food side of Moneta Pro. And what does that mean? And what is that? I mean, just the restaurant business in the United States is a $1 trillion business. When I worked in Russia and I've worked in Mexico, so much of the food industry is regulated by the government. The government does farming. The government has huge stores of food that they don't know what to do with. And Moneta Pro is one of the solutions. In my opinion, it's one of the world's great solutions. And explain how that would work. If I was a government, if I was the Russian government and I had tons of food sitting in a warehouse, why would I call you?
Well, it's a good question, and not to impress you or the audience impress upon you. The conversation, so just this morning, I was on the phone with the director of Qatar and the head of the World Bank for the infrastructure and food programs. Last week it was with Saudi Arabia, and Wednesday was with Qatar. So we're dealing at the ministry level, interestingly. But the point with food, the reason food's traded is food has an expiration date, right? So if you've got, in the U.S., if you have a grain silo and your new crop is coming in and that grain's 20 or 30% left in the silo, you have some serious issues because you can't leave it into rot. If you take it out and you don't have a sales funnel for it there, but you need that silo empty to bring the new product in. So these companies will trade. The grain company will look around and find somebody to trade the grain with. And it might be with a computer company to get computers to run their systems. It might be with a car company. It might be with Union Pacific Railroad. And so these companies do these global barter transactions. It was interesting. The guys from Ethiopia and Kuwait this morning, or Qatar, I was explaining it to them, and they said, oh, yeah, we do it all the time. We call it swaps and flips, where they're flipping gold in Kenya for food and oil. So these companies do it. You either have a commodity that diminishes in value, like a computer or a car. You have a service, like a restaurant, that you can't resell food, or a hotel. You can't resell a hotel room. If you don't sell it today, there has no value tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Or you have food, which is a big one where you've got this value that diminishes because of spoilage and expiration. And so these big companies trade these corporate assets in an off-book manner, meaning I call John, hey, you've got some grain, I've got some shipping containers that have some space in it, let's do a trade. But they're manual. We just built a system to do it automatically, where we believe it's going to have big implications globally is now you've got the sub-Saharan world of Africa and the green belt and things that have a challenge trading in the real market because of global currencies and global restrictions. This will allow them to list an asset, sell it, get this electronic credit inside a system to buy other assets.
Yes.
And that's why we're doing so much work with the United Nations and some of these other global countries is we've built a framework that we think we can help bring on a third of the world's population into a better system.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, that is an incredible solution. I did a trip into Africa and to Niamey, which is the capital of Niger, and we were with the UN and the African Union trying to discover and figure out how we could stop the desertification of Africa, create more green belt, and get more money into the hands of people.
Yeah.
And so Moneta Pro definitely has a solution for this for a lot of different countries.
Yeah, and we're attacking it. Moneta Pro will help at the corporate government global level. What you've been doing at blockchain on the food side will help at the individual level, the farmer level of how does that farmer own that plot of land? How do they get full value for the items they've created? And I know that's where you've been doing a lot of work further down, no pun intended, further down the food chain. Mm-hmm. But both sides need to be attacked. Mm-hmm. And there's some exciting things going on right now in the world. Unlike the internet, I'm always fascinated. I make a joke. Before the internet, there was no internet. And I say that and people look and they kind of laugh. There was no internet, meaning there were no web pages. There wasn't an email. There wasn't Telegram and Skype and WhatsApp and WeChat and all of the blockchain launched globally because we live in a connected society now. So you've got this opportunity to really move the needle for billions of people. But that creativity can be done anywhere in the world. You don't have to go to Silicon Valley and beg for money anymore. Creativity, in my opinion, didn't exist in Silicon Valley. Capital did.
Yeah.
That creativity can be done in Belarus or Belgrade or Belgium or Boston. And there's a whole new world of the way things are being launched and the speed that you just couldn't have done before the internet. And now you have these tools that are fascinating all the way down to the handsets and devices that people in Africa have, where they've got communication tools that they just didn't have before. So it's a fascinating time right now we're living through.
And again, to explain to teenagers that Abraham Lincoln did not have access to the internet is mind-boggling to them.
Unless you see the quote that says, Abraham Lincoln, the internet. There's a quote out there that was attributed to Abraham Lincoln, but that's a different story.
Yeah, but Al Gore invented it, right?
Somebody has to invent something. There's never one person, though, that does it, but there's always one that claims credit for it.
And I forgot to ask him that when we were standing in the cold in Davos.
No, because I was standing there next to Eric Schmidt while we were both begging to get in the Salesforce event. And I'm looking at Eric Schmidt of Google going, are you going to try and get in? It's like, no, and we just kept walking.
Yeah, that was really fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to all of the things you're doing this year. One of the most exciting things is that you have won more awards in first place than anyone in this space, but not in the United States. You've been embraced all over the world. Talk about the cities and the awards you have won.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, John. Again, it's sort of this bullseye concept is we had the opportunity February of last year to do a contest in Silicon Valley. Number one, it was the largest blockchain conference in the world. 400 companies applied, 30 were accepted. We were one of 30, 10 minutes on stage, presented against Silicon Valley judges. We took first place. And I was, all right, maybe everybody's ready for what I invented 18 years ago. So we've gone on to win 7 contests around the world: Puerto Rico, Korea, Malta. I probably can't even remember. Tonight we're in the World Startup Competition in Malibu at Pepperdine. A shout out to Lynn and the guys at Lava. But yeah, it's been fun, but it's a global opportunity that we've been presented with, and we've been fortunate to win globally 7 or 8 contests.
Yeah, and as a Swiss-trained economist, I've looked at companies my whole life. I truly believe Moneta Pro will be a multi-trillion-dollar company. It embraces everything, and the time is now. So I congratulate Stephen on his success. Hope tonight. I'd love to see another victory, and thank you.
Top 10 tonight. We're on stage again. We'll see what happens.
Stephen Meade, the BullsEye Guy, here at The Truth in Food. Thank you for joining me today in The Truth in Food. I'm John Robert Sutton. For more information about this program, please visit my website at suttonselects.com.